Today we are going to be making one of the staple parts of a Sunday roast and a Christmas dinner, which is the roast potato. The humble roast potato. I think it's one of those things that obviously there are many different ways of doing a roast potato and many different ideas that people have. I'm just going to share my tried and tested sort of go-to method today that I think will serve you well this festive season. As with anything in the kitchen, provenance is super important. I think it's often underappreciated and underplayed when it comes to cooking. So we always like to get some nice farm potatoes. Look, supermarket obviously have good options, but you're never going to beat fresh potatoes from a farm. I'm never too bothered by the actual variety. A lot of people get very overly excited by King Edward or 𝑭𝒆𝒏𝒂𝒕. To be honest, we just go to our local farm shop, whatever they've got, I'll grab, and whatever you use, they always tend to work out pretty well. What I do like to always use is an animal fat. Now, obviously, if you're vegetarian or vegan or don't like the idea of using an animal fat, olive oil does work nicely. Rapeseed oil is another option. I prefer to use an animal fat because it always seems to get them the crispiest. And ultimately, once again, very opinion-based, but I think the key way to judge a roast potato is initially the crispiness of it. Obviously, you want it fluffy inside as well, and we're going to go into that in a moment. But this is free-range goose fat from a brand that we love and that you may have heard us talking about before, which is called Piper's Farm. It's organic, it's perfect for roasting. This jar, I would imagine, will probably last 2 or 3 lots of roast potatoes, depending on how many you're cooking for. Today, we're going to cook for I would say about 6 people. But obviously, yeah, with roast potatoes, I don't think you can ever have too many when it comes to a Sunday roast. Other key ingredients for what I like to use with a roast potato is fresh rosemary and garlic. So what we're going to do first is we're going to wash these potatoes and then we're going to peel them. Now, when we're talking about potatoes for roasting, obviously you'll get all different shapes and sizes, and there's no perfect rule, but I tend to prefer a potato that size. So I always keep the smaller ones for like little roasties if we're doing something, you know, another time. But in terms of when it comes to an actual Sunday roast, and particularly Christmas dinner or Christmas lunch, a big roasty like that should give you 4 quite nice, angled, chunky roast potatoes. Normally, rule of thumb, I would say for very hungry people 2, because that should hopefully make around 6 roast potatoes. But I think if in doubt, rule of thumb, always do more, because as I said earlier, you know, I don't think you can have too many roast potatoes. Yeah, so the one, I guess, drawback of buying your potatoes from a farmer's market or farm shop is they will likely come covered in mud. But I actually see that as a positive, and it's kind of just part of the routine now. It's always worth buying a vegetable brush or a brush like this, and this will come in handy for prepping a lot of veg. When it comes to some other videos we're going to be doing with regards to parsnips, carrots, etc. I don't really tend to peel parsnips or carrots. I always just use a vegetable brush. But with regards to this, we're just going to give them a nice little scrub down. This is always quite a good chore for your other half or your children just to prep, particularly when it comes to Christmas Day. This could obviously also be done the day before with Christmas Day, getting these all washed and ready. I don't really agree with prepping your roast potatoes the day before. There's a lot of things you can do the day before or a couple of days before, whether that be the batter for your Yorkshire puddings, the gravy, potentially even the cauliflower cheese the day before. But I personally would leave the roasties to the day to get them ultra perfect. I think another area when prepping roast potatoes that's often underappreciated is actually how you peel and chop your potato. So obviously a lot of love and attention has gone into producing this, and it shouldn't be underestimated. Now, what you want for the perfect roast potato is lots of angles. You don't want a perfectly round potato, you want lots of angles, because then those angles will go really crispy, and that's where you're going to get your crispiness. So in order to create those angles, you first of all just want to obviously give it a good peel with a nice sharp peeler. But as you're peeling, you can actually start to create angles with the peeler. Rather than having it all nice and smooth and uniform, you want to create that angular shape, which is then going to go really crispy and also look beautiful. I think another thing when it comes to roast potatoes, and it is a personal preference, is considering what meat you're going to have them with. So obviously we're prepping these for a traditional festive lunch, Christmas lunch. So I think you want them to be sort of a medium size. If I was having maybe beef Wellington or something like that, I potentially would do a 𝑭𝒒𝒏𝒅 or something different. But if you were doing roasties, maybe you want them a bit smaller, a bit crispier, a bit more garlicky. If you're having them with lamb, potentially you'd add some thyme in there. So you can pimp up and upgrade your roasties depending on what you're having them with. You don't always have to cook them in the same way. I can tell these are going to be good potatoes for roasting, actually. So as I said when we were peeling, the way you peel and cut your potatoes is pretty crucial. The preparation here, like with everything when it comes to a Sunday roast, is key. So you're going to want to obviously now take the potatoes out and really analyze how many you're going to get from each potato. Then when you're cutting them, nice clean cut through, keep your hands obviously out of the way, and you want to create as many angles but one flat side like that. And I tend to start the roasties on that flat side for the first 45 minutes, get that really crispy, and that's when you start to turn them and the edges start to go really crispy. With the bigger potatoes, we should, as I said earlier, be able to get 4 out of them. And with that, you're creating 2 flat sides, which will also go really nice and crispy. I can already tell these are going to be good ones based on these size of these potatoes. So yeah, don't overthink it. No potato has to look the same as the next, but just consider, realistically, once you've boiled these and then roasted them, they are going to get a little bit smaller. So you don't, in my opinion, want them too small. But once again, that is down to personal preference. Probably should have mentioned that when I peel the potatoes, I always put the water on to boil to get it nice and hot. And then you want to add a good amount of sea salt. I always just use coarse sea salt. You don't want to go anywhere near table salt. It's for slugs, ultimately. So yeah, you want to get your water to a boiling point, and then we're going to add the potatoes. Now, timing-wise, when it comes to roasts, I have a rough time in my head, but I like to be in the kitchen keeping an eye on things. I would say you probably want to boil these potatoes between 6 and 8 minutes. Depends on the size. Obviously, the bigger they are, they're going to need slightly longer. You always want to boil them slightly longer than you think, so they come out and they are super fluffy. Obviously, if you don't boil them enough, when it comes to roasting them, the middle isn't going to be as soft and fluffy. So now we've moved on from the fact that we've angled them and we're going to make them as crispy as possible. Now we've got to consider how fluffy we're going to get the middle of these potatoes, and that's when it really matters when it comes to boiling them. So back to the fat or the oil you're going to be using. You want to get this in the oven about this time to get it nice and hot. Don't be afraid. Ultimately, when it comes to an animal fat, it has a very high smoke point. So we're going to put this into the roasting tin. In my case, we're going to be using an 𝑭𝒂, but ultimately you could use obviously an oven. The 𝑭𝒂s are roughly around 220 to 240, this top oven. You want it at around 240 because you want obviously the oil to be nice and hot. So when you add these potatoes, they're going to really get crispy. So we're going to add our goose fat into here. As I said earlier, there's no precise, perfect measurement. I often just use my eyes and touch and feel. But you want enough in there that it's going to really soak up into the potato and add flavour. But you don't want so much that they get really wet, because ultimately, if you add too much, it's not the end of the world, but it does mean that the potatoes are going to take longer. So there you go, coat the pan like that. Get it in the 𝑭𝒂, get it nice and hot. Ready to add the potatoes. Test these with a knife, and they are looking perfect. So drain them now. Now it's a good idea. I've seen some people lay them out on a roasting tray, but I like to just leave them in the colander and let them steam for about 5 minutes before you add them to the oil. Now, when it comes to this, make sure you use a gauntlet glove and not tea towel like I did earlier. Okay, now's the fun bit. Always like to do this away from your body. We are going to add these. And you want to hear that sound. If you don't hear that sound, it's not the end of the world, but ultimately the oil isn't hot enough. At this point, I like to add a bit more sea salt. Obviously you can add too much, but don't be too afraid to be quite generous. And then we're going to turn these potatoes in the oil and really coat them like this. Get them nice and coated. What you'll notice, some people might think that these look overcooked in the water. I can promise you they will go super crispy and they will have a lovely fluffy middle. Don't be afraid to go slightly further on boiling them than you think. So just over an hour has passed and the spuds are really starting to take shape. Now is the perfect opportunity to add the garlic and the rosemary to add some flavour and yeah, pimp them up essentially. So we're gonna get the roasties out, we're gonna give them a good turn, we're gonna add the garlic cloves, some nice fresh rosemary from the garden, gonna put them back in for about 15-20 minutes, and then at that point, they'll probably be ready, and it's just a decision on how crispy you wanna get them. As you can see, they're starting to take shape. We want to see them like this. Ultimately, that's the dream scenario. So I like to just do them by hand like this to really make sure that every last bit of the potato has some nice goose fat on them. You will find that some cook quicker than others, so I want to move them around a bit. Next up, we want to add the rosemary and the garlic. For the rosemary, I've given it a rinse, and you just want to hold it at the top like that and just pull down the stalk. That's about right. And then you want to get your garlic cloves and just give it a nice big smash on the back. And you want to open up the garlic cloves slightly just so that the flavours really escape. You can leave the skin on. To be honest, I find that leaving the skin on actually stops them from burning. And once again, as many as you think for taste. For this amount of roast potatoes, I'll probably use half a bulb. Give them a nice good shake up, and they're going to go back in the oven. As I say, at this point they're probably about 20 minutes off, but we'll keep an eye on them and maybe give them one final turn. And there we have it, roast potatoes done my way. I'm very happy with these. As most of you will know, when roasting anything, there's no perfect method, and you have got to just listen to the food as it's cooking, ultimately, and just judge it as we go. But in terms of roast potatoes, very happy with those. We've got a nice mixture of sizes, we've got lots of different angles, we've got lots of what Josie loves, the little crispy bits, which make sure you put them on top. I like to season it with a bit more salt and serve them as they are. My advice when it comes to actually serving the roast potatoes is those and the gravy are what I leave to the very end. So I'll get the meat out, I'll rest the meat, I'll make the gravy, and we'll show you how to make the perfect gravy in a later video. I'll get the veg out, and then the roast potatoes come out pretty much last to make sure they're nice and hot, and then the gravy comes off and we serve. But yeah, there's my roast potato recipe. Nice garlic rosemary roast potatoes to go with your chicken, turkey or goose this Christmas.